Sophie Bennett's Thursday afternoon began like any other, quiet, uneventful, and a little lonely. She sat at the small, wobbly kitchen table of her modest apartment, staring at the chipped paint on the walls as she sipped her third cup of coffee for the day. Outside, the late autumn wind howled between the brick buildings of her neighborhood, rattling the thin window panes. At 25, Sophie's life felt stagnant, a string of long shifts at the bookstore, barely enough money to cover rent, and dreams of becoming an illustrator she never quite found the time, or courage, to chase. The knock on the door startled her. Mail usually slid through the slot downstairs. No one ever came up here. When she opened it, a courier in a black coat stood there holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. Her name, Sophie Bennett, was written in elegant, old-fashioned cursive. "Sign here," the courier said without explanation. She signed, puzzled, and shut the door. Turning the envelope over in her hands, she felt a strange weight to it, not just physically but emotionally, like it carried something significant. When she broke the seal, she found a single thick sheet of paper inside, embossed with an ornate crest at the top. "Dear Miss Bennett, it is my solemn duty to inform you that you are the sole heir of the late Mr. Henry Caldwell's estate. The reading of the will shall take place this Saturday, promptly at noon, at Caldwell Manor. Your attendance is required." Sophie blinked. Henry Caldwell? The name meant nothing to her. No relatives, no family friends, nothing in her memory connected her to anyone named Caldwell. Convinced it must be a scam, she tossed the letter aside and returned to her lukewarm coffee, trying to ignore the odd chill creeping down her spine. But 2 hours later, her phone rang. It was a law office. A calm, professional voice confirmed everything. Henry Caldwell had indeed passed away, and Sophie Bennett had been identified as his only heir. They even emailed her documents proving their legitimacy. By Saturday morning, Sophie found herself driving through the countryside, heart hammering as she approached Caldwell Manor. The sprawling stone mansion loomed on a hill, surrounded by iron gates and acres of forest. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, its tall windows glinting coldly in the pale sunlight. She hesitated at the gates before they creaked open automatically, as if the house itself had been expecting her. Inside the grand foyer, 3 sharply dressed men were already waiting. They turned to face her in unison, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and disdain. "Who the hell are you?" the tallest demanded, his voice sharp. I was invited," Sophie stammered, holding up the letter like a shield. The men exchanged incredulous glances. "This is a family matter," the eldest sneered, his expensive watch catching the light. Before Sophie could respond, a door opened and an older man in a dark suit entered, carrying a leather folder. "Let's begin," he said, ushering everyone into a wood-paneled study. Sophie sat stiffly on the edge of a leather chair as the 3 men, Gregory, Daniel, and Marcus Caldwell, lounged with smug confidence, clearly expecting to walk out as millionaires. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I, Henry Caldwell, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this my final will and testament." The brothers leaned forward eagerly. Sophie's palms were damp. "To my beloved sons," the lawyer read, pausing for effect, "I leave nothing." The room exploded. "What?" Gregory roared, leaping from his chair. The lawyer continued calmly, drowning out their protests. "Instead, I bequeath my entire estate, including Caldwell Manor, all liquid assets, and associated holdings, to my biological daughter, Sophie Bennett." Sophie's breath caught. "Biological daughter," she whispered. 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward her, blazing with fury. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophie felt every eye in the room drilling into her, the weight of their disbelief pressing down like a physical force. "This is some kind of sick joke," Daniel Caldwell snapped, his face turning red. He slammed a fist against the heavy oak table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "Who the hell is she? She's not even family." The lawyer adjusted his glasses calmly, unfazed by the outburst. "Mr. Caldwell anticipated your reaction. He provided explicit documentation verifying Miss Bennett's parentage." He opened the folder and withdrew several papers, sliding them across the table. Birth certificates. DNA results. Legal acknowledgments signed by Henry Caldwell himself. Sophie stared down at them in shock. Her mother's name was there, printed in black and white next to Henry Caldwell's. Her mind reeled. Her mom, who had raised her alone and never spoken of her father, had always brushed off Sophie's questions. He wasn't important, she used to say, a sadness flickering briefly in her eyes. And now here he was, a man Sophie had never met, who had left her everything. "You're lying," Marcus hissed, jabbing a finger towards Sophie. "She's probably some grifter who conned him in his old age. I've never even heard of him until 2 days ago." Sophie shot back, voice trembling. Gregory sneered. "Oh, please. You expect us to believe he randomly left his entire fortune to a stranger?" The lawyer spoke again, his tone sharp. "Gentlemen, Mr. Caldwell's wishes are legally binding. As of this moment, Caldwell Manor and all associated assets belong to Miss Bennett." Sophie's chest tightened. She barely had $300 in her bank account yesterday, now she owned a mansion? She didn't even know how to process it. The brothers erupted in overlapping protests. Daniel threatened lawsuits. Marcus accused Sophie of fraud. Gregory demanded to see the will's original draft. But the lawyer remained implacable, each objection dismantled with calm efficiency. Finally, Sophie spoke. Why didn't he leave you anything? You're his sons, aren't you?" For a moment, none of them answered. Then Gregory laughed bitterly. "We're not his sons." "Not really." The words hit her like a punch. "What do you mean?" The lawyer interjected, flipping to another document. "Henry Caldwell adopted the three of you as children after your biological parents passed away. He raised you as his own, but legally, you were never his heirs. His will reflects his final judgment." Sophie blinked. "Adopted?" Daniel's lip curled. "We were his family. And he gave it all to some bastard child he never even met?" "Language," the lawyer warned. But Sophie barely heard him. Her hands trembled in her lap as the truth sank in. She wasn't just Henry Caldwell's heir, she was his only blood child. The brothers rose in unison, their hostility palpable. "Enjoy your little victory," Marcus spat, his voice low and venomous. "You have no idea what kind of man he really was, or what kind of enemies you just inherited." Before Sophie could respond, they stormed out, the echo of their footsteps fading down the marble hall. The lawyer exhaled slowly and turned to Sophie. "Miss Bennett, I know this is overwhelming. But Henry wanted you to have this. He said you deserved the life he couldn't give you while he was alive." Sophie stared at him, her pulse pounding. "Why now? Why didn't he ever come for me?" The lawyer hesitated. "That is complicated. Henry left instructions for you to read a letter he wrote. It's waiting for you in the study upstairs." Her breath hitched. "A letter?" He nodded. "But I must warn you, Mr. Caldwell's past is not without shadows. There are things you need to know, things that may put you at odds with his former family." Sophie swallowed hard, her fingers curling against her knees. In less than 48 hours, her life had been turned upside down. Now, standing in a mansion she had apparently inherited, faced with brothers who despised her and secrets buried in sealed envelopes, Sophie realized one thing. She was in far deeper than she ever imagined. The lawyer led Sophie through the sprawling halls of Caldwell Manor. Her footsteps echoed against marble floors polished to a mirror shine. The air smelled faintly of old wood and leather, like a library frozen in time. Portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women lined the walls, all bearing a striking resemblance to the three men who had just stormed out. She felt their painted eyes on her, as if they silently disapproved of her being there. The study was at the end of a long corridor. It was a massive room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fireplace big enough to stand in. At the center sat a mahogany desk, polished to perfection. On it lay a single envelope with her name written in bold, deliberate handwriting, Sophie. Her hands shook as she picked it up. "Take your time," the lawyer said gently. "When you're ready, I'll be downstairs." He left quietly, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Sophie stared at the envelope for a long time before sliding her finger under the seal and unfolding the letter inside. "My dearest Sophie. If you are reading this, I am gone. I have imagined this moment countless times, and yet I never found the courage to seek you out while I was alive. I failed you, and for that, I will never forgive myself. I loved your mother deeply. She was the best part of my life, but I was a coward. When I learned she was pregnant, I was under enormous pressure from my family and my business. I let them convince me to walk away. I told myself it was for your safety, that you deserved a simple life away from my world, away from the dangers that came with my name. But not a day passed that I didn't think of you. As for the boys, Gregory, Daniel, and Marcus were not bad children when I adopted them. I truly believed I could save them from their upbringing. But I was wrong. Over the years, I watched them become cruel, entitled, and greedy. They hurt people, Sophie. They hurt this family. I knew I could not leave them my legacy, not when I had you. You are my only child by blood, my last chance to make things right. If you choose to accept this inheritance, you must also accept the truth. Your brothers will not stop. They feel robbed, and they are dangerous. There are things in this house, locked rooms, documents, that will explain more. Trust the lawyer, he will help you. I am sorry for all of it, but I wanted you to have the life I could never give you. Love always, your father, Henry Caldwell. Sophie lowered the letter slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Dangerous? Locked rooms? What had she just stepped into? A sudden creak broke the silence. Sophie spun around. The study door was ajar. She was sure she had heard it latch shut. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. But faintly, just barely, she thought she heard footsteps retreating down the hall. Sophie clutched the letter to her chest and ran to the door. The corridor outside was empty, but one of the curtains at the far end swayed slightly, as if someone had just brushed past it. Her stomach twisted. The Caldwell brothers had left, hadn't they? Suddenly, a voice behind her made her jump. "Miss Bennett," the lawyer said from the hall, startling her. "Are you ready to proceed?" She forced a shaky nod. But even as she followed him downstairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was still in the house, watching her. The key felt heavy in Sophie's palm as she stood in front of the locked door. The West Wing was different from the rest of Caldwell Manor. Unlike the pristine hall she'd walked through earlier, this corridor was dimly lit and draped in shadows. Dust clung to the walls, and the air smelled faintly of mothballs and neglect, as though no one had stepped foot here in years. She slid the brass key into the lock. It turned smoothly with an audible click. The door creaked open to reveal a hallway lined with closed doors. Most of them were ordinary enough, but at the very end was one that stood out, a steel door with a keypad, starkly out of place among the wood and velvet of the old manor. Sophie frowned. What would her father need a steel door for? But first things first. She stepped into the nearest room. Inside was a private study, similar to the one she'd just been in, but colder, stripped of personal warmth. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each labeled meticulously. She opened one drawer and blinked. It was filled with documents, financial records, contracts, receipts, all marked with names she didn't recognize. She flipped through them quickly, and her stomach dropped. Several were tied to Gregory, Daniel, and Marcus. Fraud. Embezzlement. Bribery. There were even references to hush payments, large sums of money transferred to people whose names were simply listed as confidential. Sophie's father had been tracking all of it. Her heart pounded harder as she realized Henry Caldwell hadn't just disinherited his adopted sons because they were greedy. He had evidence, real, damning evidence of their crimes. Then she spotted a slim black folder marked, "Private," for Sophie. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside were photographs. Some recent, some decades old. There was one of her as a child, about 5 years old, holding a stuffed rabbit she barely remembered. Her mother stood behind her, smiling sadly. On the back, written in her father's handwriting, taken from the car. She never saw me. Beautiful. Tears pricked Sophie's eyes. He really had been there, watching from the shadows. She turned to the next page. Her breath caught. The photographs shifted from sentimental to sinister, Gregory shaking hands with a man who looked like a mobster. Daniel standing in front of a luxury car with what appeared to be a bag full of cash. Marcus entering a building late at night that bore a sign reading, Caldwell Foundation, closed. And then, one final photo. It showed all three brothers together, taken just months ago. They were seated at a long table in some expensive restaurant, laughing. But in the corner of the image, circled in red ink, was a fourth man. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but Sophie could see enough: sharp cheekbones, icy stare, and a scar running from his temple down to his jawline. Beneath it, Henry had scrawled a single word: dangerous. Sophie's stomach churned. Who was he? Suddenly, she heard a sound, soft, almost imperceptible. A faint click, like the sound of a footstep on old wood. She whipped around. The door she'd entered through was slightly ajar. "Mr. Holbrook," she called nervously. No answer. Her pulse raced. Slowly, she approached the door and pushed it open wider. The hallway beyond was empty, but at the far end, the steel door's keypad now glowed faintly red, as though recently touched. Someone else was here. Sophie's fingers clenched around the brass key. She glanced back at the documents, the photographs, and the glowing keypad. Her father had warned her, trust no one except Holbrook. Swallowing hard, she stepped toward the steel door. If there were answers in this house, they were behind it. Sophie approached the steel door, each step echoing faintly in the empty hallway. The glowing red keypad illuminated the dust particles in the air. Her hand hovered over it uncertainly. There was no obvious keyhole, this required a code. She glanced at the brass key still in her pocket. What if the key wasn't for this door at all? Sophie stared at the keypad. 4 digits. Her mind immediately went to the letter Henry had written. Birthdays. Dates. Anything that mattered. She punched in her own birthday first. The keypad buzzed angrily. Access denied. She exhaled sharply. Then she remembered something. Her father's letter mentioned how he'd watched her from afar, remembering birthdays he never celebrated. Tentatively, Sophie entered Henry's birthday. Beep. Access granted. The lock clicked, and the steel door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. Her breath caught. This wasn't just another study. It was a hidden basement. The air was colder as she descended, her footsteps muffled against stone steps. At the bottom, fluorescent lights flickered on automatically, illuminating a concrete room lined with metal shelves. There were rows of locked boxes, sealed crates, and filing cabinets marked with dates. On a large table in the center sat a massive safe, its door ajar. Inside were stacks of cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars at least, and several black binders labeled with years. She picked up one binder and opened it. Inside were case files, names, addresses, police reports, people her father had been investigating. And scattered throughout them were references to Gregory, Daniel, and Marcus Caldwell. Fraud. Extortion. Money laundering. Even whispers of ties to organized crime. One file stopped her cold. Incident report, Caldwell Foundation. The details made her skin crawl. Forged donations, stolen grant money, intimidation of whistleblowers. The brothers had turned their father's charitable foundation into a slush fund for criminal deals. And then Sophie saw another folder, set apart from the rest. On its cover, in bold red letters, were the words. The Scarred Man. Hands shaking, she opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, the same man from the restaurant picture, always in different locations, outside warehouses, in luxury cars, even standing outside Caldwell Manor's gates late at night. Beneath his photo, Henry had written, Elias Rourke. Dangerous. If anything happens to me, it's him. Before Sophie could process this, a sudden creak behind her made her spin. Someone was at the top of the stairs. Her heart leapt into her throat. A shadow stretched along the wall. Then a voice, low and mocking, drifted down. Find anything interesting, little sister? It was Marcus. Sophie froze. He descended slowly, his figure coming into view. We knew you'd come down here eventually, he said, smirking. Henry always did like his secrets. Stay back, Sophie warned, clutching the binder to her chest. Marcus chuckled. Relax. We don't want to hurt you, his tone darkened. As long as you cooperate. Sophie's grip on the binder tightened. The shelves around her suddenly felt like a cage. Marcus reached the bottom step. His grin widened. Why don't you hand over whatever Daddy left you, and maybe we won't have a problem. Marcus stepped off the final stair, his polished shoes clicking against the cold concrete. The basement felt suddenly smaller, its fluorescent lights harsh and unwelcoming. Sophie's back hit one of the metal shelves, her fingers tightening around the binder marked, The Scarred Man. Don't do anything stupid, Marcus said smoothly, his tone calm but laced with menace. You've stumbled into something you don't understand. Those files? They don't belong to you. None of this does. This is my inheritance, Sophie shot back, trying to steady her voice. My father left it to me. Not you. Marcus smirked. Your father? He was our father in every way that mattered. You? You're just a mistake he finally decided to acknowledge out of guilt. Her stomach twisted. He disinherited you for a reason. I've seen what you did, the fraud, the threats, the stolen money. Marcus lunged forward suddenly, slamming a hand against the shelf beside her head. Sophie flinched, her heart pounding. Careful, Sophie, he hissed. You think those little papers will save you? You don't know what you're dealing with. Elias Rourke doesn't care about wills or lawyers. He's already watching you. You think Dad's money was clean? Think again. The name sent a chill through her. Rourke, she whispered. He's the man in the photos, isn't he? Marcus tilted his head, amused. So Daddy told you about him? Figures. Rourke's not someone you cross and live comfortably afterward. He stepped closer, and Sophie realized with dread that he wasn't bluffing. His confidence wasn't theatrical, it was dangerous. Marcus reached for the binder. Hand it over, Sophie. Last chance. Her mind raced. She glanced toward the open safe. Inside, along with the cash, was a sleek black pistol. Marcus noticed her glance and chuckled darkly. Thinking about playing hero? Before he could react, Sophie darted sideways, grabbing the gun from the safe. Her hands shook violently as she pointed it at him. Stay back, she said, her voice trembling but loud. Marcus raised his hands slowly, smirking all the while. You don't even know how to use that thing. Try me, Sophie snapped, her grip tightening. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Marcus's smirk vanished. He stepped back, his eyes cold and calculating. You've made a mistake, little sister. You don't just inherit a fortune. You inherit the enemies that come with it. You think that lawyer of yours can protect you? He laughed bitterly. Rourke will get him first chance he gets. He slowly retreated toward the stairs, never taking his eyes off her. Enjoy your little victory while you can, Sophie. It won't last. When he was gone, Sophie's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, still clutching the gun and the binder. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. The basement felt colder than ever. She stared at the files, her father's warnings echoing in her mind. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was survival. She had enemies, real ones. And they already knew where she lived. Sophie locked the steel door behind her and clutched the binder to her chest as she hurried upstairs. Every shadow in Caldwell Manor felt sharper now, every creak in the old floorboards louder. Marcus's words replayed in her head, "You don't just inherit a fortune. You inherit the enemies that come with it." She found Mr. Holbrook waiting in the foyer, his expression calm but alert. He studied her face immediately. "What happened? You're pale as a ghost." "Marcus was here," Sophie said breathlessly. "He followed me into the basement. He knew about the files. He mentioned someone named Elias Rourke." At the mention of the name, Holbrook's jaw tightened. He gestured her into the study, closing the door firmly behind them. "Elias Rourke is exactly the reason Henry kept you away from this house," Holbrook said gravely. "Your father cut ties with him years ago, but Rourke doesn't let go of grudges, or debts." "Who is he?" Sophie asked, sitting on the edge of the leather chair, clutching the binder so tightly her knuckles whitened. Holbrook hesitated before answering. "He's a financier with criminal ties. Not a mobster in the traditional sense, but worse, someone who operates in shadows where the law doesn't reach. Henry's adopted sons got involved with him, using the Caldwell Foundation as a front for laundering money. When Henry discovered it, he threatened to expose them all, including Rourke." Sophie's stomach churned. "So my father spent years gathering evidence." "Exactly," Holbrook said. "He intended to hand it all over to the authorities, but he was dying. He didn't trust anyone else, not even me, to finish what he started. That's why he left it to you." She opened the binder and showed him the pages. "I found photos of Rourke. Files tying him to the foundation. My father even wrote, 'If anything happens to me, it's him.'" Holbrook leaned forward, scanning the documents with sharp eyes. "This is enough to bury Rourke and your brothers, but it's also enough to make you a target." Sophie's breath caught. "Marcus said Rourke's already watching me. Is that true?" Holbrook exhaled slowly. "I wouldn't be surprised. Henry's death gave Rourke and your brothers an opening. They want this evidence destroyed before it lands in the wrong hands. Which means you need protection, and a plan." Sophie gripped the arms of her chair. "Protection? I don't even know who to trust." "You can trust me," Holbrook said firmly. "Henry prepared for this. He left resources, contacts outside the law, people who owe him favors. I can make calls, but Sophie." His eyes fixed on hers, serious and sharp. "You need to decide if you're willing to see this through. Once we move against Rourke, there's no going back." Her mind spun. She'd gone from bookstore clerk to heiress of a crumbling empire tangled in crime and betrayal. But she saw her father's handwriting in her mind, those final words, "You are my only blood. You don't carry their poison." "I'll do it," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm not letting them destroy what he left me. Or what's left of his name." Holbrook gave a single nod. "Good. Then tonight, you're leaving this house. We'll relocate you somewhere safe while I contact Henry's allies." Sophie stood, gripping the binder tightly. "And Marcus? Daniel? Gregory?" Holbrook's expression darkened. "We'll deal with them. But Rourke first. He's the head of the snake." Outside, wind howled against the tall windows. Sophie glanced toward the front door, half expecting Marcus to reappear. Instead, something else caught her eye, a black car parked at the edge of the driveway. Its engine idled, lights off. She felt her blood run cold. "Holbrook," she whispered, pointing. "Someone's already here." He strode to the window and looked out. His face tightened. "That's Rourke's men." Sophie's breath hitched as she stared at the black car. Its engine hummed softly, headlights off, two silhouettes visible through the windshield. "Are you sure it's them?" she whispered. Holbrook's eyes were sharp, unwavering. Positive. Rourke's men don't hide, they wait. He turned quickly, snapping into action. We need to leave. Now. Grab only what you can carry. Sophie clutched the binder tighter. What about the files in the basement? Holbrook shook his head. Too risky. We'll come back for them later. For now, we move, before they realize we've spotted them. He pulled out his phone, tapping rapidly. I'm calling in a favor. Henry trusted a man named Callahan, former security, ex-military. He owes Henry his life. He'll meet us en route. Sophie followed him to the rear of the manor, her pulse hammering. Every creak of the old floorboards made her flinch, convinced Marcus or one of his brothers would spring from the shadows. They reached the back door. Holbrook paused, scanning the yard. Clear. We'll head through the woods. Through the woods? Sophie echoed, incredulous. Would you rather walk past them? His tone left no room for debate. They slipped out into the cold night air. The forest loomed behind the manor, dense, dark, and eerily silent. Sophie followed Holbrook, branches snagging her coat as they plunged deeper into the trees. Behind them, the faint hum of the car engine seemed to grow louder. Halfway through the woods, Holbrook's phone buzzed. He checked it quickly, muttering, Callahan's 5 minutes out. There's an access road ahead, he'll meet us there. They pressed on, but then, a sound cut through the night. Footsteps. Sophie froze. Holbrook grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a tree. 2 beams of flashlight cut through the darkness behind them. Voices followed, low, rough, unmistakably hostile. They went this way, a man growled. Rourke's men had entered the woods. Holbrook leaned close, whispering, Stay quiet. We move when they pass. The footsteps crunched closer. Sophie held her breath, clutching the binder so tightly her hands hurt. Through the shadows, she saw them, 2 men, armed, sweeping their flashlights in wide arcs. One beam landed dangerously close to their hiding spot. Sophie's heart pounded so loud she was certain they could hear it. Then, crack. A twig snapped beneath Holbrook's boot. Over there, one of the men shouted. Holbrook cursed under his breath. Run. They bolted through the trees, flashlights whipping wildly behind them. Sophie stumbled, her foot catching on a root, but Holbrook grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. Gunshots cracked in the distance, sharp and deafening. Bark splintered near her head. Faster. Holbrook urged. They burst from the tree line onto a narrow dirt road just as headlights appeared, a dark SUV skidding to a stop. The driver's door swung open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, holding a rifle. Callahan. Holbrook yelled. The man raised his weapon, firing 2 precise shots back into the woods. Silence followed. Get in. Callahan barked. Sophie dove into the back seat, clutching the binder as Holbrook slid in beside her. Callahan jumped behind the wheel, slammed the door, and floored the gas. The SUV roared forward, gravel spraying behind them. As they sped away, Sophie glanced back. Through the trees, she caught a glimpse of one of Rourke's men stepping out of the shadows, flashlight still in hand. He didn't chase them. He just smiled. The SUV tore down the winding back roads, headlights cutting through the dark. Sophie clutched the binder against her chest as though it might vanish if she let go. Her pulse was still thundering from the chase, her breath shallow and quick. Callahan drove with calm precision, his eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. We bought some time, he said, his deep voice steady. But they'll regroup fast. Rourke doesn't let prey slip twice. Sophie swallowed hard. Prey? Holbrook glanced at her grimly. That's what you are now, Sophie. The moment Henry died, you became their target. The words chilled her. 2 hours later, they pulled up to an isolated cabin nestled in the woods, its windows dark and its driveway hidden by overgrown brush. Callahan killed the engine. We're safe here, for now, he said, stepping out. Inside, the safe house was sparse but sturdy, reinforced doors, blackout curtains, and a faint hum from a generator in the back. Sophie collapsed onto a worn leather couch, her body trembling now that the adrenaline had faded. Holbrook sat across from her. We need to go over what you found, he said. Sophie opened the binder and spread its contents on the coffee table, photos of Elias Rourke, records of laundered money, and the damning files on her so-called brothers. This is enough to ruin them, she said quietly. Holbrook nodded. Yes. But Rourke has influence, judges, cops, even politicians. Exposing him won't be simple. Callahan entered, carrying 3 mugs of black coffee. Not to mention, he added, someone leaked your movements tonight. No way they got to the manor that fast unless they knew where you'd be. Sophie froze mid-sip. What are you saying? I'm saying, Callahan said, setting down his mug, you've got a mole. Holbrook's expression tightened. That's impossible. No one but us knew. Think, Holbrook, Callahan interrupted sharply. You called me the moment you spotted them. They were already in position. Someone tipped them off earlier. Sophie's stomach twisted. She glanced between them. Wait, are you saying it's one of you? Holbrook looked affronted. Don't be ridiculous. But Callahan crossed his arms. You've been Henry's lawyer for decades. Rourke would have paid good money for information like this. Holbrook bristled. You think I'd betray Henry? The man trusted me more than anyone. Trust doesn't mean immunity, Callahan shot back. I've seen better men sell out for less. The tension in the room was electric. Sophie's pulse pounded as she stared at them both. Stop, she said firmly, standing. We don't have time for this. We need proof, one way or the other. Callahan exhaled and turned toward her. Then we bait the mole. Feed false intel, see what leaks. That's how we smoke out rats. Holbrook frowned. And in the meantime? In the meantime, Callahan said darkly, we prepare for war. Because Rourke won't stop. And neither will your brothers. Sophie hugged herself tightly, staring down at the binder. Her father's handwriting scrawled across one of the pages, trust no one except Holbrook. But tonight, even that seemed uncertain. Next morning, Sophie woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of voices outside her room. She dressed quickly, clutching the binder as she stepped into the living room of the safe house. Holbrook and Callahan were hunched over a map spread across the table, their expressions grim. Morning, Callahan said without looking up. We've got movement. Rourke's men were spotted in town, less than 20 miles from here. Sophie's heart clenched. How do they keep finding us? Holbrook rubbed his temple. Because someone's feeding them our location. His gaze flicked toward Callahan. Callahan bristled. Don't start. We're doing this my way. We set the trap tonight. He handed Sophie a burner phone. You're going to make a call. Pretend you're panicked, say we're moving you to an old property Henry owned. Only 2 people will know, me and Holbrook. Sophie hesitated. And whichever one isn't the mole won't say a word. Exactly, Callahan said. By evening, Sophie's voice shook convincingly as she left the fake voicemail. Holbrook, it's me. We're leaving for the Ridgefield estate tonight. Meet us there. Then they waited. Hours later, Callahan's tracker pinged. Got him, he muttered. They bought it. A convoy of 2 black SUVs was headed straight for the fake location. Sophie stared at the screen. So, who told them? Holbrook's face was pale. Callahan turned slowly toward him. It's not, Holbrook started, but Callahan cut him off. Save it. You tipped them off. Holbrook's shoulders sagged. He looked at Sophie, regret etched deep into his face. Henry owed Rourke a debt long before you were born. I thought if I cooperated, they'd leave you alone. I never wanted it to go this far. Sophie's stomach dropped. You sold us out? I was trying to protect you. Holbrook's voice cracked. But Rourke doesn't make deals. I see that now. Callahan raised his gun, but Sophie stepped between them. Not here. We use him. Holbrook's head jerked up in shock. You're going to call them, Sophie said coldly. And tell them I'll meet Rourke myself, if he comes alone. Midnight. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sophie stood in the center, binder in hand, her heart pounding. Holbrook had made the call. Rourke agreed. The door creaked open. Elias Rourke entered, his scar catching the dim light, his smile sharp and predatory. So, he drawled, Henry's little girl. Sophie swallowed her fear. You killed my father. Rourke chuckled. Your father was sick and weak. He gave me no choice. Behind her, Callahan shifted, rifle raised from the shadows above. Sophie held up the binder. This is everything. Every dirty deal. Every bribe. Walk away now, and I give it to you. Rourke's eyes gleamed. Hand it over, and maybe I let you live. She smirked faintly. Or. She tossed the binder behind her to Callahan's feet. I send copies to every federal agency in the country. Rourke's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward, just as Callahan fired. The gunshot echoed like thunder. Rourke crumpled. At the same moment, doors burst open, FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Sophie stared in shock as Callahan lowered his rifle. I called them, he said simply. Henry's allies. They've been waiting for proof. The Caldwell brothers were arrested within hours. Holbrook was taken into custody too, silent and defeated. Days later, Sophie stood alone in Caldwell Manor, sunlight streaming through tall windows. It felt different now, not haunted, but hers. She placed her father's letter back on his desk. I'll fix this, she whispered. For both of us. And for the first time since the letter arrived, she felt ready to carry the Caldwell name. Not as their mistake. As Henry's daughter.